My name is Cyril Martin. I'm the stadium manager of the Imperial Wanderers Stadium, the iconic Imperial Wanderers Stadium. My role here is threefold. Firstly, it is to upkeep the structural integrity of the stadium. Secondly, it is to manage the events as the event manager. And then thirdly, it is to be the COVID compliance officer for the venue, which includes the biosecure environment, which is referred to as the bubble for any international matches or of that nature. My journey in cricket started way back as a 9-year-old, when I first was introduced to cricket, and I was allowed, with permission from my dad, my late dad, to play as a 9-year-old with under 15 boys, which was obviously a risk because they were a lot bigger than what I was and bowled very hard. They didn't bowl fast, they bowled hard. And so that's where it started as a 9-year-old. And then it progressed into me playing cricket at school level. I captained the Western Province Senior Schools teams. I played in 2 tournaments. I then went on to play provincial cricket as a number 4 batter for Western Province. And so yes, I've got that kind of cricket pedigree in me. And then what happened was that I became an educator. I'm an accounting teacher. And then I was called up by Western Province Cricket to be a senior selector for Western Province at Unity. So from 91 to 95, I was a cricket selector. And just to mention names of players of that era, you'll go back to Adrian Kaper, Eric Simons, Gary Kirsten, Faik Davids, Adnan Meyer, all those players, including Herschel Gibbs and Jacques Ellis. So those were the players that I was involved with. Also went on a tour with them to Australia as the team manager. And then my journey into stadium management started in 1995. So you can do the maths on that one. So it started in 1995, where I became the stadium manager of also a very, very world famous and iconic stadium. Because I believe that iconic is not the building, it's the people. People rate the stadium as iconic. So when you walk in here, nobody says wow because they're seeing a building. It's what happens inside this that makes a venue iconic, and that is why I would very easily put Newlands as an iconic stadium. Lords is iconic, and so on and so on. And so it started off there with my being involved in the stadium in 95. And basically, I'll be very honest with many people, I had no clue how to run a stadium. There's no university for it. There's no teachers training college for it. There's absolutely nothing. However, the big challenge for you is that as a stadium manager, you are almost governed by legislation. And if you get something wrong, you could be prosecuted. And so from 91 to 2009, I was the stadium manager at Newlands Cricket Ground. There I came across my first test in 95, which was with England. And then I went on to my second test, which is one of the most famous test matches in world history, where Sachin Tendulkar and Mohammad Azharuddin batted almost for a day and a half, and with India being at 56 for 5 or 6, I think it was, they batted for a day and a half, and I was there. Also got involved in quite a number of concerts at Newlands at the time. They went from Gloria Estefan, Tina Turner, Lionel Richie, Rod Stewart, Elton John, so I was involved in all of those things at Newlands. And then also the much talked about or much remembered 2003 Cricket World Cup. I was part of that. And then in 2007, and people don't actually realize this, that South Africa was in South Africa we had the inaugural T20 World Cup in 2007. And that actually happened in South Africa, and I was part of that at Newlands. And then the 2009, almost in my last kind of year at Newlands, saw the IPL being shipped out to South Africa. And when I say shipped out, the whole IPL was basically put into 3 Boeing jets, containers of marketing material, everything. They just shipped the whole, you know, people see the players, but there was a behind the scenes, there was a whole movement of stock, of rolling stock, shall I call it that. And so I was very, very privileged to be part of that. And I think one of the highlights of my journey in cricket at Newlands was the fact that I had the privilege of shaking hands with the great father of the nation, Nelson Mandela, which was quite a heartwarming and incident for me. And then in 2009, I was then literally seconded to the Cape Town Stadium to assist with the rollout of the stadium. Remember, all those stadiums were quite new. And so in 2009, I worked for a company called Sales Stade de France, who was headed by the MD being Morne Duplessis, which is equal. Remember, all the new stadiums had management companies, whether it be the most famous one, recent one that we know would be Stadium Management SA, who is the company that runs the FNB Stadium. And so there were these companies. And so I was part of that team, seconded to be part of that team. And so effectively, I was also then part of the 2010 FIFA World Cup in Cape Town. I then had a short stint in another industry. And then there was this advert for this particular position in 2011. And I flew up for the interview to Johannesburg. And when I was informed that I was being successful to take up this particular position, I was told that Australia is touring here in 2 weeks' time for the T20. And so based on my experience, I was quite comfortable in achieving that. And so that is basically been my journey in cricket. I suppose the other questions will come in terms of what's happened, okay? Yes, as I said previously, you know that there's no university for these things or no training college. Yes, you can go and do, and this is no disrespect to those individuals, but you can go and do a facilities management course. It's not going to equip you for hosting an event at this particular stadium, right? And so before I came here, the stadium was run by a company called Brawl, and basically they were a group of, and with a group of electricians, and that was their expertise, and also facilities management. But when it came to events, I think that is where they came a cropper. And so, having been at Newlands for 14 years, arriving in Johannesburg, I was told by a particular individual that this is not Newlands. And I think initially I scoffed at this comment like, you know, I mean, 14 years in this industry, I mean, what can you teach me? And I'll be the first person to say that the Wanderers was quite a big learning curve for me. Fortunately for me, I could short circuit my learning based on previous knowledge. And therefore, I believe that I regard the Wanderers as being a beast of a stadium. I've been involved with the more modern stadiums, Cape Town Stadium. However, when it comes to this particular stadium, I can say anybody who is my successor will have his hands full, and there's so many intricacies to the stadium, and I'm happy to share it one day with whoever wants to learn about this particular stadium. And so yes, for me also, you are in the economic hub of Africa. So moving from Cape Town to Johannesburg, you also have that particular scenario to deal with, that people in Johannesburg don't want things done next week. They want it last week. And so you have to also put on your roller skates and move with what is happening here. And so the one thing that I learned very quickly is, being a Cape Town born and bred boy, you get to the stage where you arrive in Johannesburg, laid back, you're not going to be caught up in this rat race, let's call it that for now, and then very soon you realize there's only one way to do it. You know, you either join them or you get left behind. Yes, it's like yesterday. You know, I've been at the Wanderers for 10 years now, but that particular question is still very fresh in my mind. I came from Newlands, having run a very successful stadium, having interacted very well with the role players, and especially the VOC commander. And when I got here, remember I came here 2 weeks before the first, before the game. And so I came across a gentleman, the VOC commander, who had been here for 25 years. And I had to obviously build a relationship, which I did very successfully. We became good friends subsequent to that. And within that 2 weeks, I had a security and planning meeting, safety and security planning meeting. I had a staff meeting, because I work on the basis of each person is responsible for his little patch. And so I don't run around the stadium to sort out ice or whatever else is required. There are people who do that. And so all of that happened in the 2 weeks. And obviously I had to be flexible and not bring my way of having done things at another stadium into this particular thing, into this stadium, i.e. use the good things which have been done in the stadium and then build on it. And that was basically my approach, and that's how you win people's respect, right? Because if you don't do that, people just back off and say, look, you know what, carry on, you on your own. And I remember that day so well, where we, it was a T20, and as you know, Australia versus South Africa, or South Africa versus Australia, sold out. The masses roll in, and then there was action. And my memory of that is, which I always refer to, is having come from Newlands, where I believe it's the best venue to watch Test cricket, because of the mountain and all those things that people talk about. It's relaxed and chilled. You can also go to cricket in the morning at Newlands and go swimming in the afternoon, or go to Canada Bay in the evening. So there's always that thing, or go swimming in the morning and come to cricket. So it's got that kind of flexibility. However, I remember that day so well when I sat in the VOC and I was now in the bullring. And the echo and the sounds that came out of, and the vibrations, I'll call it vibrations, that came out of this stadium, I can categorically say that this is the bullring. I just sat up top there, connected with the crowd and said, wow, this is something different. So my experience is that this is indeed the bullring. Yes, I believe that there needs to be an expectation. It's like going to watch your favorite artist, whoever that may be. I remember going to a concert one day to watch George Benson and Kenny G. It was a doubleheader, and I was outside that particular venue with, like, you won't believe, like, expectation, and wow, this is like the ultimate. And there's some other things as well, like being outside the Vatican City to go and see the Sistine Chapel. So those are the exciting things, and I can see it when people arrive outside the stadium, and I believe that that should be part of the wow of the stadium. There must be that air of expectation, that when and you can see people becoming anxious and they're getting excited, and they just, when they, some people would rock up at the stadium because they don't have a seat, they sit on the grass banks, and so they literally want to have the best seat in the house. And those are the people that you'll find outside the turnstiles here at 6 o'clock in the morning for a game that starts at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I just see that whole vibe of excitement. I know the peak day is very special to all of us. And what also helps a lot is that we close the whole of Quarter Drive from Rudd Road down to Athol Oaklands. And when you get into the precinct, we call it the stadium precinct, you get that vibe of we're all going to watch the cricket. And so we also have to deal with those spectators who did not get tickets because we sold out, literally sold out. Obviously that adds to another element to it of people buying fraudulent tickets, which is a challenge for them, not for us, because our access control easily picks up fraudulent tickets. And so we then have to deal with spectators who do not have tickets and will do anything to get a ticket in their hands. And so we'll go to any measure to try and get into the stadium to see their heroes, whether the heroes are South African, whether the heroes are from Zimbabwe, or whether the heroes are from India or Australia. They want to be there. I saw the great players live. And it's also basically the whole venue that you got to be there. And at the end of it all, you say, I was there when it happened. Yes, I think I'm a bit of a PR agency for the Barmy Army because my interaction with the Barmy Army started back at Newlands. And as I said, my first international tour was in 1995 with England, coming to Newlands. And then I received a phone call from a gentleman called Philip, and he introduced himself as the general of the Barmy Army. And my original perception was that this is a bunch of hooligans, that they, based on the soccer fans that the soccer hooligans that we come across in English football. I met this gentleman, I remember it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and he said to me, look, I'm the general of the Barmy Army. Now, general is obviously a high-ranking official. I don't want to know what else is below that. But the Barmy Army is basically, and what he wanted me to know from me is, what are the rules of the stadium? What are the do's and don'ts in this particular stadium? So that he can communicate that to the group, to the army. And I gave him clearly, this is allowed, that's not allowed, and he was very kind of accommodating and understanding. And then what then transpired was that I then subsequently learnt that the Barmy Army is not a group of gangsters, if we can call it that in South African context, or hooligans. It's an organized, people belong to the Barmy Army. They are tourists, and wherever England plays, they put their name in a hat, and then given the number of seats available in a particular stadium around the world, they then sign up for this tour. And so when I initially saw the Barmy Army, I didn't see people that I would, get a bit anxious about. They were just elderly folk and young folk who were basically tourists. And so they would, for example, join the Barmy Army tour and then book for a match at Newlands and a match at Johannesburg, but then in between the two, they go on holiday to Durban. And then they join the tour again. So that's basically, in essence, what the Barmy Army is about. It's a group of tourists. And so don't have any fear. They don't have any artillery. It's just a bunch of tourists. So that's basically the Barmy Army. Yes, I think what I want to do is to actually start in the start of the Walk of Fame. For me, it starts in the reception area. And what we've successfully done there is that when you are a visitor coming to the stadium for a meeting, you actually feel that you are part of the stadium, because the entrance, the reception area is clad with pictures of the stadium, and so pictures being of spectators inside the stadium. And so I always get the feeling that when I sit in the reception there, I get that feeling that I'm part of the stadium already. That's my first contact with the stadium. It reminds me very much of some of the best museums that I've seen around the world, sports museums in stadiums, where when you walk into, and also sports shops, when you walk into that particular sports shop, you feel that you're a spectator. And there's also one stadium that I've been to where you can do a 3D viewing of a match with headphones and 3D goggles and so on. And you're actually watching, well, it gives you that feeling that you're part of the stadium. And so that is what is being kind of emphasized in our stadium. Remember, we have to keep with the times. Our client base changes, our spectator base changes, and it's got to be hip and happening. And so we can't be going with the same old traditional old furniture, wooden furniture kind of look and feel. And so the Walk of Fame, which we refer to, is basically where some of the great people of the world have walked through to get to the long room. And initially, that Walk of Fame had the cricket bats of all the captains that played in the 2003 Cricket World Cup. So we had the bats signed by each team. Now, 2003, I think what has happened is there needs to be a space for those bats somewhere else in the stadium, because so many other things have happened since then within the stadium. And there have been other great captains that have walked the hallowed turf of the Wanderers. So some of the people that have walked through there would be the presidents, right? All the presidents of the country have walked that. Nelson Mandela, Thabo Mbeki, Cyril Ramaphosa, they've all walked that particular passage. I'm sure every mayor of the city of Johannesburg has walked that passage. Every great leader in cricket, I refer to the presidents of various countries, they've walked that particular path. And I think it'll be exciting for the younger generation that even Ed Sheeran walked that path on an occasion. And so it is one of those where I think we will adequately depict the people who've walked that particular path. And we've had many, many other great people coming to the stadium. And for me, one of the highlights of my career is the 16th annual lecture, the Nelson Mandela lecture, of which the former US President, Barack Obama, was the keynote speaker. But we also had Kofi Annan. We also had all the other great leaders in the world, and also in Africa, attending that particular event. And for me, that stands out. And if you go into my office, you'll still see my lanyard of that particular event. And no other lanyard will be there of any test match that I've been involved in. And so why that is so special to me is over the period that I've been involved in events, and when I say events, if I go back into international cricket, I want to place on record that I've been involved in almost 30 test matches. I've been involved in close to 60 one-day internationals and T20, and that's the sum total. If I do the sum correctly, or more accurately, I think you'll get a better assessment of my involvement but that for me is still the standout event, which I rate higher than the 2003 World Cup. It was a privilege for me to be part of such an event, of such great people. Yes, the long room for many people is also a very special place. I think the whole setup in the long room previously was very traditional. It was very colonial in a sense that it was clad in wood. It had big, long bar counters, and that was basically the long room. And I think as the demographics within the long room changed, there was a need for people to feel more relaxed. And so the long room is still very much kind of about tradition. It's the one place where if it's 28 degrees outside or 32 degrees outside, everybody will know that you are a guest in the long room because you wear your dark pants and you wear your dark suit and you wear your white shirt and you wear your tie. Now that's very much of tradition in cricket. Whether you go to Lord's, whether you go to any traditional ground in the world, that is how we present ourselves. But I think what has been good for us here is that when it comes to the more kind of white ball, relaxed kind of atmosphere, we try and relax that from the dress code gets relaxed. And so I think for me that is a good point in the right direction, a step in the right direction for making cricket accessible to all. And I think what has been very good for me is that people who have never been to the long room, and I say never, are now being afforded an opportunity to experience not the wonders, but view the wonders from the long room. And purely because I think the long room has become more community-based, and that we invite people who are relevant. You know, previously we would invite the sponsors and all important people. However, we also need to acknowledge those people who give their time and work hard in the communities, and they also need to enjoy the fruits of their labor. And very often these are the people who are the chairpersons of clubs, they are the groundsmen themselves, they're the team manager, and they play. So it's one person who does all of these things. They're the same people who buy the bag of oranges and make sure that the opposition gets fed. But there's no reward for them. And you can see on their faces that, wow, this is a just reward for my efforts. More than this, I don't need. And what is beautiful about that is that normally they're allowed to bring another person with them. And generally they would bring a fellow cricketer or a fellow administrator with them. And so for me, it's important that where we are at the moment in our country, that we share the privileges with whoever is entitled to it. Yes, I think what's important, just as a starting point, and I'll get to your question as well, is that the media center needs a special mention. In that what we had previously was a media center, again, that was not, it was purpose built for 1991. But what happened over time is that we found that the demand from media became bigger and bigger, whether it's the outside broadcasters, whether it was with South Africa into international cricket. We now have foreign TV stations wanting to be involved, and that put some pressure on the media center in terms of space. So what we had to do was obviously kind of revamp and rethink the whole layout of the media center into a more professional kind of setup, whereby there was then a need for what we refer to as in-vision studios. It's where after a game or lunchtime, commentators sit and they reflect on the game. And so what we did previously was we'll find a suite somewhere and stick them in there, and then they have to make the best of it. And so we then decided about three years ago to revamp the media center. And what's most important for me is that this media center was revamped in 6 weeks. The turnaround time was 6 weeks. And any TV station, outside broadcaster can roll in the wheels, and we are adequately prepared for them. And I have it on record of foreign commentators making reference to the fact that this is absolutely world class. And so I think our media center has become one of our flagships, one of our show-off areas within the stadium. What we've done is that previously the media center was christened as the Charles Fortune Media Center. And Charles Fortune was a commentator in the good old days before television who used to commentate on radio. But his trademark was that he could actually, you could sit at the radio and he'll sketch that picture for you as to what is happening in the stadium, and you would feel that you're a part of this. And so it went as far as him explaining that there are now two birds on the field and what they are doing, and then he would explain the whole picture around what is happening. And this all happens in between overs, in between balls being bowled. And so he filled those gaps so adequately. And so he became the doyen of commentators for that particular era. And so it was named Charles Fortune, after Charles Fortune, the late Charles Fortune. But subsequent to that, the great commentator from Australia, Richie Beno, has also been a regular face. Robin Jackman, and then of late we've also had more of the modern day players being part of the commentary team. And I think that is quite a feather in the cap for us, because one day when we, like we do for our scorers, and especially in our umpires room, we place all the names of the international players who have walked the hallowed turf of the Wanderers. I'm sure that we will do the same and have an honours board of all the commentators and the great ones who have been here. And what is also very good, I think, from a Cricket South Africa perspective, is that they have reached out to ex-players to be part of the commentary team, and also to learn their trade from the experience, the more experienced Pomi Mbangwa and other commentators. And as we go along, I can see how our commentators, ex-players, are growing and growing on a daily basis. I just want to also say that I believe that what the modern day commentators must focus on is being themselves and not a copy of another commentator. Because they also have stories to tell, having played at different stages, having different names to put in the hat of great players on both sides of the divide. We are now unified Cricket South Africa, and I think that commentators must use the opportunity to tell their stories on both sides of the coin, because they also have names which they can throw into the hat. If you were to ask me, it's not the time now, but I can throw in a host of names into the hat. The museum is on level 2 of the Unity stand, and what we have there is that for now it's only accessible on a match day to people who sit in the public seating of the Unity stand, and I think that it's actually a showpiece of the stadium that we are underutilizing. And therefore it's important for us to develop that as part of a stadium tour, where you can actually accurately get the history of the stadium. On that particular level, whilst we at the moment have cabinets, each cabinet depicts a story of an event that has happened within the stadium. And I think from my personal point of view, it quite aptly captures the history of the stadium. However, I believe that we can do a lot more based on my experience at other stadiums in the world. And there are some good plans in place where we could also become, have it more interactive with the viewers. And so I think that the museum is a good history, a good level of the stadium that's being hidden away. And I think we need to show off the history of the stadium. And so when you go onto that particular level, what do you expect to see there? You will have a cabinet which indicates to you the cricket bats that have been used by great players over the years, and it goes back to 1936, which almost is the First World War, I think it is, or Second World War. And so those bats are still very much on display there. And what you'll find is that if you look at the thickness of the bats in relation to the thickness of the bats that we have today, I had the privilege one day of having to have Chris Gale's bat repaired. And when I picked up the bat, I think I used extra muscles which I didn't have, because that bat was so thick and so heavy. But when you look at the bats up there on the second floor in the Unity Stand, you have bats there ranging from 1924, 1936, as great cricketers have donated their bats. Then you'll have another cabinet basically where you'll see the blazers of great players that have played at the Wanderers in some stage or other. And in this particular case, it will obviously be the Wanderers, the old Wanderers, when I use those dates of 1936, versus the new Wanderers, which started in 1956. The one that we are currently in is 1956. You will find pictures there of what was previously referred to as the Transvaal Mean Machine, that era of cricketers, and yes, great cricketers that played during that time. And there's a whole cabinet dedicated to that. We also have a cabinet dedicated to almost every, I would say, every test playing country in the world. And so there will be a cabinet which depicts the history of the players who played at the Wanderers for India, for Australia, for England, for Zimbabwe, and so on and so on. Then there will be a cabinet just on Pink Day, where they've captured, and I'm sure that is an evolving cabinet, because Pink Days have happened over a period of time, 10 years for now, and so there's lots of material, and I'm sure that will also be updated at some stage or other. The whole concept of mini cricket, which is for fun and enjoyment, and up there you can also see a famous picture of mine, or my favorite picture up there is the former President Nelson Mandela at a mini cricket festival at the Wanderers, and doing what he loved most was interacting with children. And so we have all of those pictures up top there, or cabinets depicting, and even the history of the Wanderers. And when we say the history of the Wanderers, you will see the history of the old Wanderers, which was previously where Park Station is. It was adjacent to Park Station. And so with the expansion of Park Station, there was a need to take the land adjacent to it, which was the old Wanderers. And then it moved here. And so very often in 1956, and so very often people become confused with the old Wanderers and the new Wanderers, because we only know one Wanderers. And it was very interesting not so long ago, in fact, in the last India tour, one of the Cricket South Africa officials who had been involved in cricket for as long as I know, I knocked into him at the museum, and he was looking at things. And then he said to me, "Tell me, is there an old Wanderers and a new Wanderers?" And I could take him to the cabinet, and I said to him, "Read the history of the Wanderers." And so that is a huge volume of material that you will find in there. One of the interesting articles that I came across there was that the first match on turf in the Transvaal, it was Transvaal versus Free State, was played in 1936. Sorry, it was 1936. And that tells you a story of how it evolved. In fact, I need to correct that. It was around about, yes, 1936 it was, where the first match was played on turf. And the first match was Transvaal versus Free State on turf. And so much later, other groups started playing on turf. And that was 40 years later. And I think that is a whole discussion, another discussion for redressing the imbalances of the past. But I think the Scorers Association is a very special group of people. And I think short of mentioning people's names, I think I'll need to discuss them as a collective and not single out any particular person or persons. But I think the foundation was very, very well laid by the scorers who went before. And so the evidence of that is the Scorers Association, every year, Cricket South Africa have an award for the Scorers Association of the Year. And I think by now they've already penned in the Scorers Association for the season because they've won it for the last 14 years. And so that is the commitment of the Scorers Association. And when I look at the new scorers that they are introducing, I can see that there's a seriousness about maintaining the high standards at the stadium. But also, one of the scorers in particular has now become a scorer for and tours the circuit with Supersport versus SABC. So one of the scorers, Sue Abbott, is a regular at all the stadiums, and she's a scorer for the broadcasters or the commentators of SABC. And so that's the role. And I think what's important is that between Sue and Lorna Kerr, who I know of being the scorers of way back in the day, they are very happily handing over the baton to a new generation and a younger generation representative of everybody. And I think that is a good approach in maintaining the high standards, and that they don't have the accolades of being the best scorers of that era, but it's going on from generation to generation. And so that is, for me, a big feather in the cap for the Imperial Wanderers Stadium, in that we have had the best scorers association in terms of Cricket South Africa awards for the last 14 years, and well guided by some good veterans. The umpires' room is adjacent, obviously, to the visitors' change room. There also, we've had to expand, because where previously we only saw 2 umpires on the field, we now have almost 6 people in that particular room performing different functions. In the umpires' room, you will find an honours board where the great umpires who have stood, international umpires and local umpires, who have graced the hallowed turf of Imperial Wanderers Stadium, their names are up there. One of 2 that comes to mind almost immediately would be Steve Bucknor, the great West Indian umpire, who stood in more than 100 tests. And then there's obviously the other world famous umpire called Dickie Bird. And Dickie Bird was a brilliant umpire, but also when the score was on Nelson, which means 111 or double Nelson, he would stand on one leg as superstition, because normally a wicket is supposed to fall on Nelson or double Nelson. There were other great, Rudy Koetsen, South Africa, Cyril Mitchley, to name but a few. And so they've been very, very, very good and great umpires who've graced us over the period of time. In my previous role, as I said previously, where I was involved with, as a team manager, not with the national side, but in a Western Province perspective, I think it's quite an environment to be in, a change room, because in the change room you have to deal with the batsman who scored 100, and you have to deal with the batsman who got out for the first ball duck. You've got to deal with the bowler, and so there are lots of emotions in the change room, and that is why your team management is so important to knit all of that together and to deal with those things. I think it's also very important for me to say that there are some stories that are not allowed to be told. What happens in Rome stays in Rome in the change room. However, my experience is that there's a definite hierarchy from my experience. I'm not saying it happens now, but there's a definite hierarchy in the change room where the coach will sit, where the captain will sit, and where the senior pros will sit in a change room. There's a definite hierarchy as to who sits where, because there's a sharing of advice and readily sharing of information. And so that is always the difficult part in a change room if you are the new kid on the block, because you may just find yourself sitting on the senior pro seat, and then you will get the look as to, you're supposed to sit in the corner over there, and you'll progress to this particular point. So for me, that is basically my recollection of life in the change room. I think it's also an area where the winning team, last match of the series, will hang around for a very long time for good reason, and the opposition would sometimes join which is the way to go, I think. Join the winning team and share cricketing ideas, and you may have a batsman who's struggling with a particular bowler, and then the bowler, be it Shane Warne, which happens very often. Shane Warne would be a guy who would tell the batsman, I will get you out every time because this is what I do. And therefore it's up to the batsman to go and counter that particular advice he's been given. However, on the other flip side of the coin, Shane Warne would have given him information, whether it's correct information or incorrect information, but it's up to Shane Warne then to say, okay, I've divulged this artillery of mine, this weapon of mine to him, let me find another weapon which I have not told. And that is the beauty of players getting together for some refreshments after the game, where we share tricks of the trade. I saw a very interesting picture, a live picture during the India series, where Hashim Amla was chatting to one of the Protea players on the boundary, and they were not talking about the beach in Cape Town. They were basically sharing ideas, because the batsman he was talking to was an opening batsman for the Lions, Ryan Rickleton. And so he was giving, in that 5 minutes, he was giving Ryan Rickleton, and that advice as to how to improve on his technique, or Rickleton may be struggling with a particular bowler, he was giving him advice. Or maybe mental stuff. How do you deal with playing in the Test arena with Rickleton being a newbie to the scene? And that is, for me, the beauty of actually, the most important thing for me that happens in a change room is when people have refreshments and they share the tricks of the trade. The bell in cricket is a very, very, very historical thing which we've just continued, tradition. And you will see the scenario where the teams are in different change rooms. And there has to be a way in which you start the game, i.e. the umpires need to let the players know that they are now going out onto the playing field. And so traditionally, Lords and all other grounds have a bell. So what happens now is, and we've kept that on tradition, when the umpires, and that's why you'll see it is right next to the umpire's room. When they walk out, they will ring the bell, indicating to both teams that we as the umpires are now going out. You must now please leave your change rooms and come and join us. And that is the history of the bell. And it's one of the traditions of cricket that has been upheld over since day one. And that's the significance of the bell. And what we've done at Imperial Wanderers Stadium is we've actually had a cross-section of athletes, and even recently we've honored Sipokazi, who's the media officer for the Proteas. And I think that was a very good step in the right direction, because her history is not necessarily as being a world-class athlete. Her history is being world-class in what she does. We've had Bruce Fordyce, we've had Caster Semenya, we've had the late U.S. van der Westhuizen, to name but a few. And those are the people. But again, like I said previously, is in the change room we have achievements, an honors board of players that have done well at the Imperial Wanderers Stadium. In the scorers room, there will be an honors board of scorers over the years, over the generations. In the umpires room, you will find great players, umpires who have walked onto the hallowed turf of the Imperial Wanderers Stadium. And that is why I believe that in the media center, we should do a similar thing, where we actually have an honors board of the great commentators, the great people who have rung the bell at Imperial Wanderers Stadium. So I think that's important, that we actually also honor those. But we've done that so that if you go to the bell, but what I'm saying is it's been we've only started it about, let's say, 10 years ago. And many, if the first match was played here in 1956, then that bell has been rung by an individual for a very, very long time. And so different individuals over a very long time, and therefore I think it's important to actually, going forward, to capture those moments in history. I also think that to add to that whole players match officials area, there's another very, very, very important element to that area, and that's the famous tunnel. The tunnel where the players walk down. The history of the tunnel is that Merv Hughes, the Australian opening bowler, was abused by spectators, and then it was a requirement to protect the player, and that was the best answer we came up with back in the day. And so that is actually the Merv Hughes, I call it the Merv Hughes tunnel. It's there because of an incident. However, it provides fantastic commercial value in that we can depict our sponsors, our naming rights sponsors on there, which gives them great value in terms of TV coverage. But more importantly for me is also the fact that inside the tunnel, when you walk up there, we have players who have walked down that tunnel, great players, and I think we're in the process of upgrading it to be representative of the great players of the world, and also the great South African players, albeit that South Africans are also great players of the world. So I think we need to upgrade that so that the great players, whether it is Brian Lara or Graham Gooch or Alan Lamb or Hashim Amla or Kagiso Rabada, all those great names, Themba Bavuma, they need to be depicted there as part of the history of this ground. I think the pictures the most is the stage. The stage where the play unfolds itself. And I normally feel very sorry for the groundsman, because in my planning as a stadium manager, it's a direct science. It is what it is. But for a groundsman, he has done the best he can under the circumstances, but only when the first ball is bowled does he start to relax in the first hour, because what he had in his mind is not what he's seeing because remember, he doesn't have an opportunity to assimilate a Boomerang or a Kagiso Rabada bowling on that wicket, or an Ashwin bowling on the wicket. So for me, it's a science in that he needs to prepare the best wicket he can. And the trick is really, personally, I think it's easy to prepare a wicket for the ODI, just as flat can be, benefit the batsman, and the bowlers must keep working hard. However, our groundsman here, Evan Flint, and most groundsmen, they try and find a balance between bat and ball, because it's a fair competition, a fair competition between bat and ball. And so I think that's important, which he strives to achieve. Evan Flint is not new to the game, like me. He cut his teeth initially at Kingsmead as an assistant groundsman, then went down to Newlands for a period of 10 years, I think it was. And then we successfully managed to get Evan to join the team at the Imperial Wanderers Stadium. And his credentials at the time was that he had been the groundsman of the year for CSA for 3 years prior to joining us here. A gentleman that is very, very, very humble, very camera shy. He's going to hate me for this, but knows his trade. And I think it's also fair for me to mention that prior to Evan Flint, we had Bethwel Buthelezi here as a groundsman. And Bethwel Buthelezi was the groundsman, I think, for a period of 3 years. Bethwel cut his teeth under one of the great groundsmen in the world, Chris Scott. And Chris Scott was the groundsman at the Imperial Wanderers for almost 25, close to 30 years. And Bethwel cut his teeth under Chris Scott's reign. Chris Scott's fame to claim is that he was the head groundsman for the 438, the famous 438 match. And when I asked him, how did he do it? He says he doesn't know. I must ask the players. He prepared the same wicket as he normally would, and it was just chaos on the day. So he would say to me, ask the players what they did, don't ask me what I did. And so I think it's fair to mention Chris Scott as one of the legendary groundsmen. And also under his tutelage, Bethwel Buthelezi had a stint as the head groundsman, and then followed with Evan Flint, who I think is one of the best groundsmen I've come across in my career. I think there's a twofold approach to that. The first part would be to look at the stadium on a daily basis, where we would have our security service provider, cleaning service provider. By and large, basically, that would be the most key elements. We would also have our internal maintenance team, and then we would have external service providers who would we call, if the job gets too big for the maintenance team, we would call in the external service providers. However, the operation becomes a lot bigger when it comes to events, in that there are two parts to the event, where on the one hand we have the Event Safety and Security Planning Committee. That in essence is the committee that sees to the safety and security, headed up by the VOC commander, which is the SAPS representative from Bramley Police Station. And in that operation you will have JMPD, environmental health, security service providers, medics, and all of those service providers, and on and on and on. In that particular scenario. And then what I also do is we have our event planning from a CGL perspective, Imperial Wanderers, where I call meetings with staff members. And in that particular meeting, we would assign different roles. So for example, in the media center, there will be a person who's responsible for the media center from our perspective. I call them divisional heads. And so if there's any problem in the media center, I hold those people accountable. The open East stand is the only original part that is left of the 1956 stadium. So in essence what I'm saying is that in 1956 the whole stadium looked like the Open East stand. I think it was named in that particular way once all the other stands developed around about 1991. And so the original stand is the Open East stand. And I think from an historical point of view, I need to add that the area where we now have the Yoga Experience, previously Standard Bank and the Castle Corner mega suites, that was, back in the day I shall say, was the part of the stadium, where the non-whites were allowed to sit within the stadium. And so I think that is significant because there are other venues or other stadiums like Newlands, etc., where people used to sit, people of color used to sit in the willows, under the willow trees. And so based on my research, I established that that was the area where non-whites used to sit. Then we go on to Kent Park, the Taverners Pavilion. Kent Park Taverners, group of individuals who do good work, very much like a Rotary establishment. And the stadium is basically built in 1956 on this plot of land that is referred to as Kent Park, which was a green belt. And so when the stadium was built, the Kent Park Taverners requested that that particular building be named after them. However, I think as a point of correction here is that the building is called the Taverners Pavilion, and on the ground floor, first floor, there is the Kent Park Taverners, which is the group of individuals. So that is just the history. Kent Park being the park that was here on which the Imperial Wanderers stayed, the new Wanderers was built. Then we get to the Unity Stand, and the Unity Stand signifies the unification of cricket between the Transvaal Cricket Association and the Transvaal Cricket Board, which happened in 1991. And so this stand depicts the unification of cricket, therefore the Unity Stand. From there we go to the Western Pavilion, and the Western Pavilion is so named just purely because it is in the western end. Like Open East, we have the Western Pavilion. I think the architects didn't do a good job there because the venue operations center is on the 3rd floor and there's no lifts in that particular stand. So I very often find officials complaining to me that there's no lift, and I gladly explain to them that stairs is healthy for your heart. Then we go, and also in the Western Pavilion is where we will find the scorers, we find the venue operations center, we will find the players area, change rooms and match officials area, and that's the Western Pavilion. Then in the northwestern corner quadrant of the stadium, you'll find the Memorial Stand. And the Memorial Stand is so named after cricketers who played for South Africa, who died during the World War I or World War II. And so if you go into the entrance there, you will find pictures of those players who played for South Africa, but passed on during World War I and World War II, and therefore it's in memory of those players. And then Centenary Stand. The Centenary Stand is a century, and the century is Transvaal cricket was 100 years old, and then at the time they chose to name that the Centenary Stand, and therefore the Centenary Stand references Transvaal cricket. Those are basically the stands within the stadium. I think what is important is that given the number of events we have in a stadium, which amounts to about 20 events per year in a stadium, of which we sell out about 2 of those events. I think it's important to find other avenues of revenue. And so what we've done is that through John O'Leafright and Greg Fredericks before him, tried to convert the stadium into kind of a multi-purpose venue, although we're not zoned for that. In terms of office space, yes. In terms of commercial space, in a portion of it. When I say multi-purpose, we're not allowed to have concerts and other events, which is part of a process. And so the first tenant that we engaged with was the Wanderers Sports Medical Centre, which is the brainchild of the now physio of the Proteas team, Craig Govender. And he had the view that we need to have a venue for elite and also for public training, rehabilitation, etc. But coupled to that, he also wanted to have a one-stop shop where you can come to a sports doctor, you can come to a podiatrist, you can come to an optician, all those things that are relevant to sports persons. So instead of getting into your car, you can actually make an appointment at the Wanderers Sports Medical Centre where your rehabilitation can be monitored. You can, on the same day, go and speak to a sports doctor, an optician. Eyes are very important in the game of cricket, and all those other podiatrists and all those various, at one stage we had a dentist here as well. And so it's like what people don't know, it's actually open to the public. And because it's called the Wanderers Sports Medical Centre, there's a perception that it's only available to sports people, but it's actually open to the public on appointment. Then what we also did was utilize the space more effectively by converting some of the suites into conference rooms or meeting rooms. And so therefore you can book a meeting room for 6 people or for 20 people, but that's been converted. And then in the memorial stand, we've also have quite a number of tenants there. There are about 20 suites in there which have been converted, and I think the occupancy in there at the moment is about 95%. But I think what's important there is that it's a 360-day revenue generator, which is important for the sustainability of the game of cricket, because we also need to bear in mind that the revenue from the ticket sales is shared between Cricket South Africa and Gauteng Cricket. And that the core function of Gauteng Cricket is to promote and foster the game of cricket outside of the Imperial Wanderers, and therefore there needs to be other revenue streams. In the Taverners Pavilion, we now have 3 floors being occupied in total by 3 different tenants. So what we've done there is that on the 4th floor, not much renovation was required. 3rd floor, we had 6 suites, which we've now white boxed, which means we took out all the walls for a particular tenant, and that tenant is occupying that, and we're doing the same for the 2nd floor. And I think the beauty of that is that, for me, it's not a waste, because should those tenants one day decide to move out, those can be easily converted into networking lounges. And so for hospitality purposes, which is very common in the modern stadiums, you have 6 suites with no walls in it, and it then creates an opportunity, what is referred to as a networking lounge. You sell a hospitality ticket, and you can rub shoulders with other business people or other important individuals, or just community-based individuals. So I think it's a good move in that particular direction. I don't think there's going to be a need to reconstruct those suites again, because that particular model of suites, I can see over this period of time, is fast becoming redundant. Companies are more and more reluctant, based on the legislation that governs them in terms of taking suites, i.e. you have to share the information. So for example, if I were to invite somebody from Standard Bank to come and watch a cricket match, he has to disclose to his company that he's received a ticket, what is the value of the ticket, and all of those things. And sometimes the approval process is quite cumbersome. For example, if you work for Aon, who at one stage were our insurers, they had offices in London, but the match is in 2 days' time. So I think that is why more and more, and just the whole financial model of corporates have changed in terms of how they actually spend their marketing budgets. And then I think a very, very good innovation at the Imperial Wanderers Stadium has been the yoga experience, where you can come to do yoga, obviously, and just hot yoga and just normal yoga. They're on a very professional setup, and the yoga experience was run for almost 17 years at Thrups. The owners took the plunge to move it to the Imperial Wanderers Stadium. I believe it's added value to us and it's added value to them, because the whole tranquility of the Imperial Wanderers Stadium, you experience that where you are not confined to 4 walls, but in doing your yoga, you are so close to nature being in the Imperial Wanderers Stadium. You hear birds, you hear cricket bats, you hear golf balls, and that's also beautiful. And of course, being in Johannesburg, outdoors is the thing. So you can have your yoga indoors, or you can have it on the hallowed turf, on the outfield of the Imperial Wanderers Stadium. Well, the food court at the Imperial Wanderers Stadium, I think the challenge there is that we need to have a very fast turnaround time. And so the offering needs to be, from the food court, needs to be very, very specific. There's no set menu as to what is being offered. You're either buying a burger and chips, or you're buying fish and chips, or you're buying exactly that. And so the turnaround time is important, because the break during a test match is 40 minutes, during a T20 is 30 minutes, and I don't think if you're going to be buying a beer and then going somewhere else to buy some food, you need to focus on, we need to focus on what our clients are here for. They are here to watch cricket, and we can't get them to, they don't have the luxury of a replay once they get back to their seats. Whilst we obviously try and put some TV cameras so they don't miss any of the action. But the food court on a pink day needs to service close to 25,000 people in that particular period of time. However, some people are smarter than others. They go before the break or they go after the break. But queues is a no-no at the Imperial Wanderers Stadium. We try and avoid it at most costs. So in essence, it will range, serving will range from 5,000 people to 25,000 people. The indoor nets obviously is used more often during inclement weather, because Joburg has the most fantastic weather in the world, and therefore outdoors is the thing. Recently we upgraded our indoor net facility, and so currently the lux level in the indoor facility is 800 lux, which is in keeping with the international norm for indoor events. In the indoor facility, we've also changed the surface to be more compatible in terms of the bounce. And I think the big difference that I would say that we have is we have a bowling machine. Now, bowling machines are normal in indoor nets or to cricket, which is basically a change in the length of the ball, pitching of the ball, and also very difference in the speed of the ball. What we have acquired for the Imperial Wanderers Stadium is we have a bowling machine that is called a spin bowling machine. And so therefore that bowling machine can bowl off spinners, loop the ball, bowl leg spinners, I think bowl googlies. And so all of that I think will improve our nemesis in South African cricket, where we are known not to be able to play spin so well. And therefore, that bowling machine has been a great investment from our side, where our batsmen or batters, whether they are 11 or whether they are in the Protea setup, playing for the Lions, they have access to that particular bowling machine, which I think it's quite a good acquisition on our part. I think we're the only province in the country that has such a bowling machine. Going from there into the outside nets, the practice nets, we have quite a bank of nets there, stretching the width of more than a rugby field. And those nets are basically used, they are divided firstly into international nets. And so when we have international cricket, only those nets are utilized for international cricket. All the TLC goes into them and we unveil them for international cricket. However, when the international season is finished, we make them available to the domestic cricketers. Obviously, we need to bear in mind that the domestic cricketers practice a lot more at the facility than the international cricketers. And so we have more nets for them, and the turnaround time is a lot greater for them. And then we have another set of nets which we refer to as the winter nets, because during the off-season, the nets that are used during season, they are now being maintained. The off-season maintenance work is being done on them, and therefore the top dressing and the scarifying and all that, those nets are not available. But given the good weather in Johannesburg, we can still practice, but we don't have nets, and therefore we've created another bank of nets which we refer to as the winter nets. And our teams can then practice on those nets while maintenance work is being done on the normal nets. I think the greatest joy for me is being part of a fantastic team, the way in which we go about our business. There's mutual respect for each other's professionality and our field of expertise. And through all the CEOs that I've worked with, Kasim Dokrat, Greg Fredericks, and now John O'Leafright, I think that has been a common thread through all of it. I think for me also, it's been a dream come true in the South African context, that I've been involved with 3 different stadiums in South Africa, be it Imperial Wanderers Stadium, Cape Town Stadium, and Newlands. And for me, having managed over the past 10 years, the premier stadium in the country is the flagship in my resume of stadiums that I've been involved in managing. And it's just a special place in world cricket. The Imperial Wanderers is a special place in world cricket. And I remember Steve Broad, the great English bowler, when he took 6 for 26 here, hailed the Imperial Wanderers as his favorite stadium. I suppose because 6 for 26, but I'm sure there are many players who can tell good stories about the experience. And for me to have witnessed the 16th annual lecture with Barack Obama president, with me having witnessed A.B. de Villiers' knock, which I almost missed because I think it was a half an hour of activity. It looked like a highlights package. Having witnessed that, having witnessed South Africa beat India for the first time in 30 years at the Imperial Wanderers Stadium, I think those are little flagships in my head, which I will speak very fondly of for a very, very long time.